I think that the rules are going to be simple. We are going to give each presenter 10 minutes to make his presentation. And my suggestion is that maybe after every 2 presentations, then we can have some discussions, or the questions will be in the chat, and then, we answer them. So the first presentation is on the application of fuzzy analytical hierarchy process for assessment of desertification sensitive areas in northwest of Morocco. And the presenter is Hisham. Hisham, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, good afternoon, dear professors, dear participants, and organizing committee of this event. I would like to talk in this presentation about a topic entitled Application of a Fuzzy Analytical Hierarchy Process for Assessment of Desertification Sensitive Areas in Northwest of Morocco. I am Hisham Ait Qasim, third-year doctoral student in geosciences at the Faculty of Sciences in Choc, Casablanca. So, in the plan of our presentation, first, we will start with a general introduction. Secondly, we are going to present the problems and objectives of our study. Next, we will define the study area. Then, we will develop the methods and data used, and we analyze the results. Finally, we conclude we conclude our presentation. So desertification is one of the major problems facing the communities. This phenomenon gains ground every year, contributing to the disappearance of 12 million hectares according to Sustainable Development Goal 15 on terrestrial life. So an update assessment of land desertification sensitivity index maps is essential for comprehensive planning and the preparation of action plans. So desertification risk is due to climatic variations and human activities. The question is, which method can be used to assess sensitivity to desertification with optimal solutions? So the classic method is the medalist approach, Mediterranean desertification and land use. And the second method is the FAHP, Fuzzy Analytical Hierarchy Process Model, combined with the medalist approach. So in the first method, this first method is based on defined thresholds and limits. And the science, there are no boundaries between ecosystems and reality. Therefore, their method needs to be improved for an accurate assessment of desertification. In this study, the new approach combining fuzzy analytical hierarchy process model and the medalist approach has been used as one of the effective ways to assess desertification using geographic information system. The objectives of our study are estimate the importance and priorities of factors affecting desertification, assess and quantify the vulnerable areas from different land uses, and identify indicators of highest importance to the high sensitivity and land desertification. In this study, we choose the Dredger Basin as a study area. It's located in the northwest of Morocco. The Dredger Basin covers an area of 500 square kilometers. The climate is semi-arid Mediterranean. The average annual rainfall varies from 650 to 700 millimeters. The average annual temperature at 18 degrees Celsius. So the sensitivity analysis of desertification land was made from 5 basic indicators: the climate, the soil, the vegetation, the water, and the management quality index. The 5 indicators were obtained based on the geometric mean of the priorities of importance and the MAPS fuzzy of 17 parameters. On the basis of several data sources, we have defined 17 parameters that determine the state of climate, soil, vegetation, water resources, and land management. Then we calculate the weights of indicators and the parameters with the fuzzy analytical hierarchy process. With the fuzzy overlay function, we calculate the fuzzy quality index of each indicator and the final land degradation sensitivity index. So we have the soil quality index with the 5 parameters: texture, parental material, soil depth, slope, and drainage. The water quality index with two parameters: drainage density and groundwater depth. The vegetation quality index with 4 parameters: fire risk, erosion protection, drought resistance, and the vegetation cover. The climate quality index with 4 parameters: rainfall, aridity index, slope aspect, and wind speed. And the management quality index with 2 parameters: agriculture intensity and policy enforcement. The fuzzy AHP method was used to assign appropriate weights to individual parameters of each indicator and also weights to indicators for the final land degradation sensitivity index. So after calculating factor weights for each level, we convert classic parameters to fuzzy data. This is an example of map fuzzy membership. Then we combine maps membership values with the control rules of different information layers for desertification to drive the fuzzy output. In the step of defuzzification, the final intensity of each index was calculated according to the following equation, which W is weight of each information layer and Y is fuzzy map of each information layer. In the spatial assessment of quality indicators, the analysis of the resulting indicators showed spatial differences of land states. So this is the distribution of the considered indicators' quality. On the basis of distribution and quantification of 5 indicators, we notice that most of the indices have moderate intensity to desertification, except for the management index, which has a high intensity to desertification, about 92% of the total area. So, on the basis of the 5 indicators, we calculate the final land desertification sensitivity index, and this is the distribution of sensitivity areas to desertification in Wadi Dradder watershed. Here also, the summary results of the sensitive area of desertification and the percentage of different land desertification sensitivity index qualities. Finally, we conclude that the results of the final index showed an interesting spatial distribution of surfaces with 58% of the study area having a fragile sensitivity to desertification. The future vision of the study is to predict the severity of desertification risk in the future in an environmental approach. Moreover, desertification evaluation maps have a potential for the preparation of action plans and taking an appropriate management decision in a shorter time, contributing the goal of Agenda 2030 at the national level on the fight against the changed climate and the protection of terrestrial ecosystems. The Sustainable Development Goals directly concerned are respectively the 13 and 15. So thank you for your attention, and thank you to the organizers of this event for giving us this opportunity to enhance our research work. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Hisham.
Merci.
Thank
you.
The next presentation is by Jacob, but I understand they've interchanged. So Mr. Danso will now make his presentation.
Okay, hello. Please, can you hear me now? Hello?
Juan?
Hello?
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 Please,
Juan?
Sorry, I think...
Sí,
so
dime,
Mr.
Esther.
Danso, the floor is yours.
Dime, Esther.
¿Puedes hacerle co-anfitrión a Cuando Danso?
Cuando danzo...
Con K.
Sí, ya le veo.
Yes, I'm here. Please,
Vale.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Who are you, Daniel?
Yes,
Daniel?
can you share your screen?
Okay.
Perfect.
Please, can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm presenting on the topic valuation of solid waste management attributes and household preference heterogeneity in urban Ghana. Basically, we are applying the district choice experiment technique, one of the techniques of valuation within the non-market goods. This work is part of my PhD at the University of Ghana Economics Department, and other people that are also involved in this research is Professor Trefo, Dr. Bekwe, and then Professor Palu. So the presentation will have a motivation, which will include research questions and also some contributions to the literature that we intend to make. And then we'll go through a little bit into how we undertook the district choice experiment. We'll discuss the estimation strategy for the work, some results that were used from the work. There will be some policy implications, and then conclusions will be discussed. Now, from an economics perspective, normally management systems efficiency always will have to relate to approaches that ensure that there is maximum benefit that the society can get from waste disposal. However, in many developing countries, waste disposal are normally underpriced or sometimes even unpriced at all. And this makes it very difficult for policymakers to be able to infer the exact economic benefits of such environmental goods, such as solid waste management and its disposal. So in most studies in sub-Saharan Africa, in order to infer economic values, they have relied on approaches such as the contingent valuation method. But this approach is less informative in respect that we are not able to know how respondents attach various quantifications or values to the attributes embedded in the solid waste management process. So for the CVM approach, you only have an overall valuation, but we are not able to know how respondents quantify them using the attributes of the commodity. So the CVM tries to address this concern. It allows researchers to describe the good in a way that you'll be able to see various attributes, and it will allow investigations to be done into their relative importance. So in these studies, we are going to utilize the district choice experiment technique. Ideally, we are going to assess the preference of urban houses in Ghana for improvements in solid waste services at various attributes and levels, of course. And we'll establish how preference heterogeneity with respect to household social and economic characteristics are able to influence these kind of preferences that households have. These analyses are very important because it will help policymakers to evaluate the information about benefits and also the costs and how trade-offs are done within the solid waste management process. It is also useful in the sense that it contributes to the Sustainable Development Goal 6, Target 3, goal 11, target 6, and goal 12, target 5. Which goal 6, for example, 6 to ensure availability and sustainability of management of water and sanitation for all, while goal 11 and 12 look at ensuring sustainable cities and communities, as well as responsible consumption and production respectively. So what we seek to do is to find out the preferences of households for improvement in solid waste management services, considering various attributes and levels. And we're asking the question that do the effects of solid waste management attributes for which households are going to quantify, do they differ across households in various settlements like the low, middle, and high income communities? And we also want to find out whether there are any common preference heterogeneities with respect to household social and economic characteristics that influence the household preferences that we are going to measure. We contribute to literature in two specific ways. The study addresses the key issues from a developing country context, where household involvement in some solid waste attributes, such as source separation, for example, is not a norm. From what I've researched so far, this is quite unique, and it is almost the first in Sub-Saharan Africa. Secondly, our sub-settlement analysis as adapted in this study seems to be very, very innovative, and it is very novel within the literature. So how do we undertake the DCA? Now, we identify the attributes by discussions with stakeholders within the municipality and the municipal and district assemblies. And we were able to channel down the main or important attributes of the solid waste management process into 5. The first is the cost of waste collection. Second is the number of sorting categories, the collection frequency, the collection reliability, and the distance to waste collection point. The levels for cost is actually on 4 levels: 10% more, 15% more, 20% more, 25% more, for various improvements in the solid waste management. The number of sorting categories were 3. One is where there is no sorting at all, which is normally the norm, and then whether sorting can be done into 2 categories or 3 categories. Collection frequency is in 3, low, moderate, and high. Reliability is 2, whether it's reliable or not reliable. The distance to disposal has 4 levels, where you work more than 10 minutes, or between 6 to 10 minutes, or between 2 to 6 minutes, or even less than 2 minutes. Most of the variables almost all the variables apart from the cost variable are dummies. The cost variable is actually measured in a continuous fashion. We use the status software to do an analysis by generating the de-efficient design, which has been proposed by Hall and others in the status software, literature. This time we are making no prior assumptions about the parameters. And we use this efficient design to generate 30 choice sets, which are blocked into 5. So for each block which the respondent actually face, the respondent will answer to 6 choices. Now, each choice set has 2 alternatives, and there is an option for the respondent to opt out. The attribute levels for the opt-out option is held at the lowest levels of the various attributes as we discussed earlier. And at the lowest level, that's actually more or less like the Teto score. Below is an example of, the choice set, an example of the choice set that is showed to a given respondent, where the respondent can either choose the preference of A, B, or opt out with a C. We try to also analyze to ensure that our experimental design is as efficient as possible by going through some diagnostic checks. We test for orthogonality, we test for level balance, and we test for minimum overlap. For the lack of space and also time, we will not present those things here, but basically, the data actually passes all these diagnostic tests, showing that our experiment is actually efficient. And then we also add some other, variables relating to solid waste handling, individual preferences, and some demographic and socioeconomic characteristics for us to be able to analyze the heterogeneity aspect of the study. The data was taken from 5 metropolitan district assemblies in the Greater Accra metropolitan area, which is and this was done based on a clustering methodology, which has been done by a World Bank paper in 2017. And we use a combination of stratification and randomization to collect data from 3 socioeconomic communities: high income, middle income, and low class settlement areas. And we relied on the Cochrane estimation formula for sample sizes to be able to pick the samples. Now, compared to the 342 estimated sample sizes that were supposed to survey based on the Cochrane estimation formula, we actually ended up sampling about 426 households across the various settlement areas that were the high, middle, and low income. Now, the estimation strategy, the basic model underlying choice experiment have always been the random utility model, where the model poses that an individual who is faced with a choice between a mutually exclusive alternative described with a vector of attributes will opt for the one associated with the highest utility. So that's the random utility model, that whenever you are faced with a choice, you're always going for the one that maximizes your utility. But in terms of the regression analysis, 2 regression analysis actually have been the major things that have been done in the literature: the multinomial logit model, and then the random parameter or mixed logit model. Now, the basic model, which is the multinomial logit model, assumes that preferences across all respondents are fixed, restricting the individual, parameters to almost the same kind of.
I'm sorry, Mr. Nanso, you have 5 more minutes. I'm sorry, you have 5 more minutes.
Yes, thank you. Don't worry. Thank you very much. So the multinomial logic says that the homogeneous preferences are the same, whilst the random parameter model tries to capture heterogeneity. So basically, given our estimation strategy, we ended up having about 7,596 observations. And we are interested in estimating the model that is placed down there using the various estimation strategies that we've described earlier. So based on this, I'll quickly move on to the results so that we look at what we found out. So for the full sample, which is trying to look at overall what preferences within the solid waste management process do households really place value on, we realized that sorting into 2 categories was found to be very, very, very important for households, so that you can see that it is very significant, whereas sorting into 3 was not significant. Now, when you look at the random parameter model, which is the second model, you realize that for the sorting into 3, the standard deviation tells us that it is significant, tells us that there is some heterogeneity, or people have different preferences for sorting into 3, although it's not significant in the means. We find out that people also want more frequency as opposed to low frequency. People also are interested in higher reliability. However, distance to disposal sites are most often not, significant, although you will see some heterogeneity differences as seen in the significance in the standard deviations. Now, when we split the sample into high, middle, and low income, the story do not change much, just that we find that with sorting into 3 categories, for people in the low income communities, they are strictly having a disutility about it, so that if you apply such a thing in a low income country, people will virtually not pay, or people will not actually do what you want. So that is what the disaggregation actually tells us. One thing about what we see also is that reliability seems to be the most prized attribute, which is having a very high kind of value. It is important to also note that the models, as we have discussed, only give us ideas about significance. It doesn't tell much. So it is important to analyze willingness to pay. So the willingness to pay for the various attributes, but some of them have been estimated in that table that we find below. What strikes us, and I want us to emphasize on, is the fact that reliable collection is very high in terms of how much people are willing to pay. It tells us that people are willing to pay as much as 16% to 18% more to have a reliable collection. It is even more interesting when you look at the sub-income community analysis, where we see that low-income households are even willing to pay as much as 27% more. Now, when we want to look at what other socioeconomic variables dictate this, trend, we realize that education and people who are already sorting, people who already have some high level of income, are more likely to want to pay more, as opposed to the case where we have people who are paying higher fees in terms of higher monthly charges for their waste disposal. Because of time, I would just like to move on. Now, what does this tell us about policy? It tells us that education is important for waste sorting. So while the government free SHS policy is important, it is important to also embed the lessons of the peoples with proper waste management and environmental sustainability, lessons, so that it will be taught in schools, at least even from the lower levels. Now, subsidy for sorting into more categories is also very important, because we find out that although people are willing to sort, whenever you increase the fees, the significance of the sorting variable reduces or it diminishes at all. So we may have to incentivize people to even want to maybe engage in proper sorting. Now, from the results, we find out that we need to have tailored policies for different communities, because communities are not necessarily the same. High-income communities differ in their responses to these kind of attributes, and with regard to what low and middle-income communities also does. So the willingness to pay values associated with the various attributes tell us that it is important for us to look at these attributes in planning for improvement of solid waste management. And they are also useful for policymakers in considering rational changes in the existing collection fees by comparing with costs and benefits. I would like to end here, and your comments are welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Danso, for that presentation. You went above your time, but I think we can take the third presentation, right? Juan Robles. Juan, are you there? I think we can take the third presentation. It's on hydraulic systems in West Saharan region, wells and fogaras of what? Of Algeria, Mauritania, and Western Sahara. Juan Robles, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Right, very good, very good. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the organization. I am going to talk with my colleague Tariq Otbane from Orange University. I take only 5 minutes. We work with audiovisual and qualitative methodology, and I am going to share my screen, and we are going to see some little pieces, short pieces of audiovisual. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, well, then we present an approach to our research work, liquid water cultures. It's a part of this research work, which enhance Western Sahara water cultures. We focus on the transformation of the hydraulic system of Northwest Sahara, the fogaras of the Algerian Adrar, and their connection to the south with the well water. That's a Bedouin and camel culture of the Mauritanian Adrar and Western Sahara. As you know, the advance of climate change in the Sahara Desert today threatens both hydraulic system under its tangible and intangible heritage. Economic and commercial models based on intensive agriculture and mining exploitation put pressure on non-renewable groundwater reserves. We are committed to the local population in their struggle for the right to a dignified life that has to be recognized, and a sustainable use and regulation of its resources, in this case, water resources. We think that solutions will come by putting traditional knowledge and new technologies into dialogue. It's a theoretical approach from political ecology. In this project, we underline the theoretical and practical approach of legal pluralism that come from authors like Boaventura Sousa Santos. Legal pluralism as a way to regulate this hydraulic system. So we find 4 legal codes: the customary norm, the norm derived from Islam, the national law that springs from their national constitutions, and international norms. As you see, these 3, we work with interactive and transmedia audiovisual methodologies. That's our qualitative methodologies from digital humanities that allow us to reach a diversity of and large audience that come from academics, communication, and education. We show you our little, our short teaser.
¿Habéis pensado alguna vez que el futuro del agua de nuestros mundos podría depender de saber escuchar y mirar a quienes hoy luchan por ser escuchados con sabiduría ancestral? Soy Liquid.
Well, as you see, that is the teaser of a part of our work. Every thread, every point opens and leads us to the specific world and audiovisual materials of every community, of every place, of every country that we are working today. Sahrawi water culture. This is one of those countries in which we are working now. Sahrawi water cultures is based on the wells that is distributed in its territory. It's a nomadic community, as you know, who have to be able to move freely in their territory. A territory that was assigned by the United Nations in 1960, as you know. The regulation and the regulation of use and access is based on the Bedouin norm, on the Islamic norm, and the state norm of Sahrawi Republic.
يعدلوا الماء ما يعدلوا لقاش معين يعدلوا الماء للجميع خلوا مكسب للعالم كامل اللي جاي من هوك وجاي من هوك وجاي من هوك كسوراع هو من هو
هذه الامور كانت الناس المده كانت لما مثلا يمشي حد يلوث الربيع الناس من القحط خارج وكذا يعني يمشي يلوث منين يجمع رياضه كبيره ويعرف عن الناس ياسم يركز فيها الا علم الناس يعني علم الناس عن رأيه.
إلا بغيتو تسد تصور تشوف الرجلين اللي هون ها يوقف بعد أخي بها معاد
Well, thank you very much. And now I pass the word to my colleague, Tariq Kotbani. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. So I'm focusing in the Fogara system, and we hope in our project to continue with this transmedia methodology to work in Algerian Sahara. But in another example, it's not wells, but another system. It's called Fogara. So I will continue in French if you want. Donc la Fogara, c'est un système hydrosocial qui est très connu dans le Grand Sahara, Algérie, Maroc, Tunisie, Libye, etc. Et c'est un système très ancien qui est basé sur un usage très contrôlé de l'eau, parce qu'on est dans un contexte de sécheresse et d'hyper-aridité. Donc, c'est une forme d'adaptation des hommes au contexte difficile de contraintes naturelles. Donc, ce système de Fogara assure l'irrigation des palmeraies qui nourrissaient auparavant la population locale des oasis, mais aussi les caravanes qui traversaient le désert du pays du Sahel vers l'Afrique du Nord, vers l'Arabie, le Moyen-Orient, etc. Donc, ce système ingénieux était géré auparavant par deux formes de légitimité. Donc, il y a la légitimité coutumière et la légitimité religieuse. Donc, l'entité coutumière est composée essentiellement par les propriétaires de l'eau, des Fogara, et par le comité local qui s'appelle l'Ajma'a, qui est formé de sages, de personnes âgées, de l'imam, etc., et une partie des propriétaires de l'eau. On a aussi les propriétaires de la Fogara. Donc, et ces derniers coordonnent avec l'Ajma'a pour tout ce qui est volontariat, afin de réhabiliter ce système de tunnels qui est relié à des puits verticaux et qui ramène l'eau à travers la pente vers la palmeraie. Et dans cette palmeraie, l'homme exerce l'agriculture. Donc, cette entité locale, elle a la fonction de maintenir l'ordre social qui est caractérisé par l'existence de trois groupes ethniques. Donc, il y a les Shurfa qui maintiennent la propriété de l'eau. Il y a les Haratim, c'est les agriculteurs, mais il y a aussi les Merabtim qui tiennent la fonction de l'artisanat et du commerce. Donc, c'est cette entité qui gérait les affaires des trois groupes. On a l'entité religieuse ou la légitimité religieuse qui influait sur la politique de la gestion locale à travers la charia, c'est la jurisprudence islamique, donc dans le domaine de l'héritage de l'eau, dans la propriété foncière, etc. Et c'est cette entité religieuse, à travers ce qu'on appelle la Zawiya, c'est les Quranic Schools, qui formaient les imams et l'élite qui constituait la composante principale des comités locaux qu'on a appelé la Jama'a. Mais depuis l'indépendance de l'Algérie et des pays du Maghreb, il s'est ajouté une troisième légitimité qui est représentée par le pouvoir institutionnel qui a déverrouillé par sa politique agraire à caractère socialiste l'accès à l'eau et à la terre à travers le creusement de forages équipés de pompes électriques et aussi des mécanismes juridiques et une politique écologique qui a permis l'accès à la fois à la terre et à l'eau. Donc, l'intégration de l'acteur institutionnel comme moteur de développement a eu des conséquences positives sur l'espace et la société, mais aussi des conséquences négatives. Donc, rapidement, je vais les citer pour les points positifs. Donc, on assiste à une réduction, un recul spectaculaire des écarts entre couches sociales. Et maintenant, on parle plus de ségrégation raciale entre Chorfi, peau blanche et Hératine, peau noire et Mératine qui sont des Nets et des Berbères, mais plutôt de différenciation sociale due à la situation historique vécue. Aussi, un point positif, on a l'augmentation de la production.
I'm sorry. Ali, please, can you conclude? Your time is up.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So for the conclusion, il y a aussi, avant de passer à la conclusion, il y a aussi des inconvénients suite à cette intégration de cette troisième légitimité. Donc, il y a des problèmes environnementaux parce qu'il n'y a plus de comité local qui contrôle l'usage de l'eau. Donc, tout le monde creuse des puits, des forages, etc. Donc, on assiste à un rabattement du niveau de la nappe isométrique et en même temps l'assèchement de certains systèmes hydrauliques anciens. Aussi, la salinité des terres au niveau des palmeraies, émergence de conflits entre usagers, et ça est dû par rapport au recul du rôle du comité local suite à l'installation de l'acteur institutionnel. Néanmoins, pour aller à la fin, depuis quelques décennies, on assiste à une nouvelle dynamique qui apparaît dans les oasis algériens. Donc, c'est un renouveau agricole qui est dû à la prise en charge de la société des problèmes environnementaux et sociaux, comme l'intégration de l'énergie renouvelable dans la gestion des fougaras. Donc, on a les fougaras qui sont alimentés, par exemple, par des pompes solaires. On a des propriétaires de fougaras qui se sont reconvertis en ONG, des associations de l'eau, qui collaborent avec l'acteur institutionnel pour capter des fonds afin de réhabiliter ces ouvrages, la constitution de comités qui gèrent des forages d'une manière collective. Donc, il y a plusieurs points positifs qu'on essaie de les mettre en exergue à travers une approche de transmédia afin de constituer un modèle de gestion durable qui pourra faire face au changement climatique et pourra aider à assurer une sécurité alimentaire durable. Et merci pour votre attention. Thank you very much.
Yes, hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, I think I had a problem with my network. Talik, please, have you completed your presentation?
Yes,
right.
I completed the presentation.
Thanks very much. So the next presentation, French, and it will be made by Amadou Toure, and then Salifu Norma Amadou. Please, you can have the floor now. Salifu Norma Adamu, go around.
Alors, bonsoir
Yes.
tout le monde. Alors, vous m'entendez?
Yes. Go ahead.
D'accord. Donc, là, je m'en vais vous présenter la présentation concernant l'impact des investissements réalisés au Niger dans le cadre de la gestion durable des terres sur la résilience des communautés rurales et l'adaptation des services écosystémiques. Alors, avant de rentrer dans le vif du sujet, je tiens à remercier très sincèrement les organisateurs, les professeurs qui nous assistent, également l'ensemble des participants. Alors, moi, je suis Nomad Salifou, je suis doctorant en 3e année à l'université Kadiaya de Marrakech, donc ici au Maroc. Mais j'aborde une thématique du Niger. Alors, mon plan d'étude se présente comme suit. Vous avez le plan, vous avez une introduction. Nous allons aborder également quelques méthodologies, puis résultats de discussion. Et nous terminerons avec une conclusion avec quelques perspectives. Alors, en introduction, retenez que le Niger est l'une des zones du monde, ou bien de l'Afrique en tant que telle, qui est soumise à une forte pression humaine. Et notamment, cette forte pression humaine, elle est surtout exercée sur les ressources naturelles. Et ces ressources naturelles constituent également la principale source de subsistance de la population. Alors, en dehors de cette pression humaine exercée sur les ressources naturelles, le Niger fait face également à une forte pression démographique. Et cette pression démographique exerce que l'agriculture et l'élevage. Donc, vous avez environ 80% de la population dont leur activité principale, c'est l'agriculture et l'élevage. Alors, cette situation socio-démographique, couplée aux aléas climatiques, ont entraîné énormément de modifications profondes sur le système de fonctionnement des hydrosystèmes, notamment en ce qui concerne les bassins versants. Alors, nous avons constaté une dégradation des terres, avec également un déclin du couvert végétal, également avec des conséquences graves sur les rendements de culture. Alors, c'est dans cette perspective que l'État nigérien et ses partenaires ont tenté de réagir à travers la mise en place de ce qu'on appelle des projets d'adaptation au changement climatique et à la pression démographique. Donc, ce sont des activités que l'État nigérien exerce en partenariat avec ses partenaires, non seulement pour aider la population à ne pas faire recours aux ressources naturelles, mais également pour une instauration également des systèmes du couvert végétal qui est en train d'être surexploité du jour au lendemain. Le second objectif également de l'intervention de l'État dans le cadre de la résilience des communautés, c'est surtout de renforcer leur résilience, puisque au Sahel, on a une population à faible capacité résiliente. Donc, ces interventions visent également à renforcer leur capacité d'adaptation. Alors, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, l'objectif principal est double. Donc, le premier objectif, nous allons dans un premier temps évaluer les investissements réalisés à l'échelle du Niger sur tout le territoire avant d'entamer le second objectif à travers lequel nous allons nous intéresser beaucoup plus sur la restauration des écosystèmes, notamment à travers la récupération et la restauration des terres dégradées. Alors, la zone d'étude, le premier objectif, comme je vous l'avais dit, on va se concerner beaucoup plus à l'échelle du territoire nigérien, mais on va également centrer un peu le titre. Ici, vous avez le Niger. Vous avez le Niger. Ici, vous avez une commune rurale, donc située à environ 70 km au nord de la capitale Niamey, donc où nous avons mené des enquêtes également au niveau des communautés rurales bénéficiaires. Donc cette zone, comme géologie, est formée par des formations du continental terminal. Le climat est de type semi-aride. Donc, les sols sont pauvres en matière organique, en calcium, en phosphore, mais également en capacité d'échange cationique. La végétation est de type steppe arbustive à arborée, avec une forte démographie. En 2011, cette commune est occupée par une population de 110 458 habitants. Donc, comme je l'ai dit dans l'introduction, l'agriculture et l'élevage restent toujours les principaux moyens de subsistance de la population. Alors, en méthodologie, nous avons d'abord mené au cours de cette étude une enquête socio-économique d'abord au niveau des services techniques de l'État et après au niveau des bailleurs de l'État, notamment au niveau des organismes internationaux tels que la FAO, le PAM, l'UNICEF, en tout cas tous les bailleurs qui interviennent dans le cadre du renforcement de la résilience des communautés. Et après cela, nous avons également, comme les images l'illustrent, nous avons également conduit des enquêtes au niveau de la population bénéficiaire. Et pour voir également l'impact de ces travaux au plan écologique, nous avons mené des enquêtes sur une espèce végétale qui a été plantée dans le cadre de ces projets de restauration des terres dégradées. Nous avons choisi l'Eucalyptus camaldulensis, qui est une espèce exotique, c'est-à-dire une espèce qui n'est pas de la zone qui a été importée. Donc, nous avons également essayé de suivre la croissance de cette espèce. Et nous avons également, en ce qui concerne la pédologie, nous avons prélevé environ 40 échantillons de sol sur les 10 premiers centimètres du sol pour pouvoir évaluer surtout la répartition, la distribution granulométrique des sols. Alors, et nous avons les échantillons analysés ici précédemment, nous les avons expédiés à partir du Niger, nous les avons amenés ici au Maroc, où ces échantillons ont passé à travers le granulomètre laser à diffraction laser. Donc, nous avons passé des analyses granulométriques aussi. Alors, comme résultat, retenez que, parce que ici, nous nous sommes référés au dernier rapport, le rapport de l'État, le rapport des bailleurs et également les rapports au niveau des services techniques de l'État. Donc, le dernier rapport qui est à notre possession date de 2019 parce que pour le rapport de 2020, il faut mars 2021 pour avoir le rapport de l'année précédente. Donc, en 2020, environ en 2019, pour l'année 2019, environ 2 milliards excusez-moi, environ 20,6 millions de dollars américains ont été investis par l'État nigérien et ses partenaires dans le cadre de la gestion durable des terres. Et retenez que parmi les 20,6 millions de dollars américains, donc environ 115%, ce qui voit à peu près 15,5 millions de dollars ont été distribués à la population bénéficiaire comme cash for work. Ici, ce qu'il faut retenir par cash for work, ce sont des travaux de récupération des terres dégradées que les paysans exercent en contrepartie d'une rémunération en espèces. Alors, ces investigations nous ont permis également de constater deux choses. La première chose, c'est en ce qui concerne au plan écologique. Donc, les activités engagées par l'État nigérien et ses partenaires ont permis aux paysans, surtout dans le monde rural, ont permis vraiment aux paysans de subvenir à leurs besoins prioritaires. Donc ici, on voit achat des vivres, dépenses pour les scolaires, habillement, soins sanitaires. Donc vraiment, ces activités de restauration des terres dégradées viennent contribuer à l'amélioration des conditions de vie de la population. Parce que c'est une autre source de revenus. Parce qu'au début, la population exploite les ressources naturelles, mais ces enquêtes nous prouvent que avec ces travaux de récupération, la population fait de moins en moins recours aux ressources naturelles parce qu'il y a une seconde source de subsistance. Donc ici, au plan écologique, on a constaté que ces aménagements ont beaucoup contribué au développement des espèces lumineuses.
Hello.
Oui.
Your time exceeded your time. Please, can you conclude?
D'accord, sans souci, je vais conclure alors.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
D'accord, donc alors ce sont ici, vous avez des croissances des espèces lumineuses qu'on a pu mesurer. Alors ici, ce sont les résultats de l'analyse granulométrique. Malheureusement, le temps ne me permet pas de vous les développer. Alors ici, en conclusion, retenez que les travaux ont contribué à l'amélioration des conditions de vie de la population, mais également à la restauration des terres dégradées. En perspective, nous allons continuer également les analyses pour voir en dehors de la granulométrie, notamment la matière organique, les phosphates, les calciums, les éléments chimiques que le sol constitue. Alors, je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Merci beaucoup.
Je vous en prie.
I think we have the last presentation. I will suggest that we take the last presentation and then we can, have the discussion, the questions and comments. Please, you can put your questions on the chat platform so that the presenters will take a look at it and then respond to them when the time comes. Now, the last presentation is coming from Mr. Jacob Opantu, right? Mr. Jacob Opantu is speaking on a topic, determinants of relocation against flood risk in urban household, a case study of the Greater Accra metropolitan area. Mr. Opantu, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Prof. And I think you have to allow me to share by making me a co-host.
Wait a minute, Juan.
That's fine.
Juan.
Okay. Sí, Esther, acabo de hacerle.
Gracias. You can share. Okay, Jacob.
All right. Let me first inquire if you can see the slide.
Yes, we can see it.
See the slide now.
Great, thank you. So I greet all of you. Due to the international nature, I can't really tell what the time is, but my greetings to everyone. So I'm Jacob, and I'm presenting on the determinants of relocation against flood risks in urban households. And we are using the Greater Accra metropolitan area as a case study. Working on this paper with Daniel Trifo and then Elali. So this is a brief outline. We'll look at the introduction and then I briefly present the theoretical and empirical model that we use for the estimation. Then we have a discussion of the results, then the conclusion. So climate change, which is impacting, and there is the cry everywhere, tends to be affecting African countries tend to be more vulnerable because they tend to depend more on the environment. Most of their food and activities tend to be coming from the environment. There is a high dependence. So if nothing is done, African countries are going to be impacted more as a result of climate change. And one of the impact is flood. is ranked as one of the highest climate-related disasters that is actually causing more harm to people. Between 1995 and 2015, it's been indicated that it contributed to about 47% of weather-related disasters, and actually affecting about 2.3 billion people with some 157,000 fatalities. And this is a very serious issue which, when not addressed in the near future, will continue taking lives. Now, when we talk of flooding, in the case of in the case of Ghana and specifically the Greater Accra metropolitan area, almost happening every year. Yes, it may be caused by rainfall, excessive rainfall, and the river bodies or the sea flowing beyond its banks. But then this is also intensified by the indiscriminate disposal of waste and then the poor drainage system that is found in most of these communities. And then urbanization, more people are moving to these urban areas and they tend to be settling in places, mostly slums, and they are more vulnerable. And one way to handle this, we think, is the human mobility, trying to get people out of these slums or these flood-prone areas. We believe it a way to control some of these impacts. And when we talk of flood risks, it actually depends on three key terminologies: the hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Hazard has to do with the probability that, well, there can be less excessive rainfall or water flowing, the overflow, and then causing harm. Then exposure has to do with the presence of people, animals, or other assets that are likely to be affected. We talk of vulnerability, though you may have people living within the same community, but the extent or propensity to which they will be impacted by the same activity may vary. So these three terms, when we put together, form what we call the flood risks. Hazard, we may not be able to eliminate, but then exposure and vulnerability to an extent can be controlled. And one way to control this is relocation, trying to get people out of the flood-prone area. They are not vulnerable anymore and they are not exposed, even though there is the likelihood of the flood coming. For the Greater Accra metropolitan area, for a zero vulnerability, then it means that we may have to restrict people settling in this flood-prone area. But this has already happened, probably because of weak institutions and so on and so forth. They are already there. The second option is to use engineering procedures like flood walls and so on. But then the space to do some of these things is also limited. So what we try to do is to investigate if we want to move people this area, or we want to suggest to people to move from this area to reduce their vulnerability and exposure, and probably also to make way for some of these engineering procedures. What are some of the factors that will influence their decision either to relocate or not? Even though relocation, has pointed out as one key approach that can be used to reduce some of these impacts. It's also been indicated that, people living in some of these areas, for some of them, they are aware, they know.
I'm sorry, Jacob, please, you have not more than 5 minutes. We need to, complete 50 minutes earlier, please.
Okay,
if you can round up a little.
Okay, so we try to investigate the factors, and we believe this is important because the government of Ghana and others are also looking out for ways to reduce some of these impacts. The approach we are using, the theoretical model is the utility maximization and uncertainty, and we're trying to see relocation as a mitigation measure. Household may decide to relocate or not depending on their risk preference, whether they are risk loving or risk averse. So that is the theoretical underpinning that we are using. And the empirical model is a probit model. So we try to estimate the probability of people relocating. So this is the descriptives representing the average of the variable average, the minimum and the maximum of the variables we use. And the data was coming from the Cities and Climate Projects. It's a project that was conducted by the Regional Institute for Population Studies on the University of Ghana. So the data we use for the work is from this project. So the results, well, what we found is that when we look at the age of people.
Hola, no te preocupes. La sesión que va delante tuya todavía no ha terminado porque estoy yo dentro, ¿vale?
When we look at the age of people, we realize that it's not just having a linear relationship,
entonces,
but a non-linear one.
So el último ponente, ¿vale? Si quieres, yo te aviso porque pensaba entrar también contigo para ver si tenías algún problema.
I think someone else's mic.
Jacob, you can unmute. Jacob, you can unmute yourself. I think.
Okay, can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we realize that as people grow, they are less likely to move. They are not willing to leave. But then it gets to a certain age that now they are willing to move. And we found that age to be 55 years. And the probable explanation is that, well, when people are in their youthful ages, they feel they are less vulnerable. But then as they age, now they see that they are more vulnerable. So now they'll be willing to leave because if the flood should come, they are likely to be impacted. Looking at the length of stay, what we observed was that the longer people stay in a community, the less likely they are or the less willing they are to relocate. And we can see that from the higher magnitude, depending on the lower number of years someone has stayed. So for someone who have stayed there between or less than 5 years, is willing to relocate, and that probability is higher compared to someone who has stayed there for between 5 to 10 years or more than 10 years. So as people stay more in the community, they get familiar, they build connections, and they get some social attachments, and they are not willing to relocate even if they know there is the likelihood of flood. House ownership, we observe that for people who own their houses, the probability of relocating is low. They are not ready to go, and it's possible because, well, they own their houses and they could look out for other alternative ways of adapting to flood. Probably try to raise their floor level, use sandbags, and so on and so forth. And actually, in the survey, when people were asked, I mean, the few number of people who indicated that they are willing to relocate, when they were, when we look at people who own their houses, just one person indicated that if they perceive the flood coming, they try to relocate. Majority of them try to resort to other ways to hedge against this flood. For education, we only found secondary or technical education compared to those without any form of education and willing to relocate. And for people who have lost some assets in previous floods, we saw that they are ready to go because they've lost something in the previous one. They wouldn't want that to happen. Those who have lost some income, they are ready to go if that offer is made to them. The frequency of flood. For people who think that flood occurs frequently in their community, they are also ready to go compared to those who think it is probably a random something. Not occasion, it's not obvious, it doesn't happen often. But if people think that flood, like in the case of the Gamma, where it has become almost an, I mean, they are willing to go. Flood information, when people receive information about flood, we saw that these people are willing to relocate. And that is very important. So if there is some early warning system for them, they will be willing to go. And again, it's also very important because before people settle in the community, it will be very good for them to know the flood profile of the community, whether the place they are going to is flood prone or not. Actually, in the study, the data revealed that about 87% of people indicated that, I mean, they weren't aware that the community they are going to stay in or the area is prone to flood. And this is very serious because it is a requirement in the settlement zoning in Ghana that people get to know some of these things before they settle in the community. So there is a need to look at some of these issues again, whether the policies are really being enacted. Perception of flood risks. If people who think that the risk level of flood has increased, they are willing to relocate compared to those who think that it has not changed. Then for community variable, we saw that for people who have their houses at a higher level above the sea, the probability of relocating is low. And the simple explanation is that they perceive that if there is flood, the water should easily recede, so their vulnerability is very low. Well, so from the data, we saw that majority of the people are not really prepared to relocate. Well, possibly because we didn't post to them or indicate to them where they will be moving to. And that is so the factors that are influencing the relocation decision is also presented. And the policy implication is that if you want to encourage people to move from these communities, then you need to look at for some of these variables. The second issue is that, well, there is one variable that I think I skipped in the presentation, is the adaptive measures. We saw that if people perceive that there are measures in place to help them escape the impact. So for instance, there is an ambulance and there is a particular source or emergency line that you can call when there is flood. And we developed an index using 8 variables. And what we are seeing here is that if people perceive that there are adaptive measures from policymakers, they are not willing to go. And from the data, we realized that, I mean, for people who indicated that they were aware that their communities are prone to flood, they were about, it was about 15% of the people. We realized the majority of these people have a higher perception of these adaptive measures. So it's likely that if people know that their communities are prone to flood, then they look out for whether there is some adaptive measure if the flood should happen before they decide to settle. And for these people, because they have this information, the probability of relocating tends to be very low. So the recommendation is that, well, we have two-way approach to handle this. Majority of the people are not willing to go, but yet some are willing. So for those who are willing, and now that we know the variables that influence the decision, policies can be enacted in that direction. And then for people who are not willing, then we need to empower them to be able to live with the flood using some of the engineering procedures as much as can be done. Okay, so thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Jacob, for that presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've come to the end of our session. I was thinking that we'll have some time to look at the questions that will be posed, but unfortunately we do not have time. So what I can say is that I saw just a couple of questions. So I would suggest that participants take it up on bilateral basis. So you can just get straight to the presenter and then see what responses that he can provide for you. Esther, do we have any housekeeping issues? Or we can leave and then the next session, which starts in 4 or 5 minutes. Am I right? Hello, Esther. Hello.
Daniel?
Yes. So I think, as you said, we can end over here. and then the next session can start. I'm advising that
yes.
Participants take the questions on bilateral basis.
Yes. We should leave the meeting. Yes. Okay. Juan.
Yeah. Hello, Esther. We finish on it.
Yes. Como eres el anfitrión, tú tienes que dar a finalizar para todos, para dejar la sesión libre.
Okay.
Cuando des a salir, pon finalizar a todos.
Vale. Okay.
Vale. And thank you very much to everyone. We will send a certificate of assistance. And if you have any question, you can send me an email and I will redirecting the questions to the speaker.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Daniel.